Hello. Hi everyone. Today we are bringing you a question bank for the PMP Project Management Professional Certification. This question bank is a bit different from some of the content we've covered before. Previously, we've discussed some practice questions and some multiple choice questions. We've talked about lab questions related to Red Hat and Kubernetes, and we've also covered multiple choice questions for Microsoft's Azure. No matter which type of question it is, the overall question banks for these are relatively stable. But today, what we're going to discuss here, the PMP question bank actually has some differences compared to those. For those previous exams, you could basically cover all the questions just by practicing a large number of questions, so just by memorizing them, you had a high chance of passing the exam. But in this case, first of all, there is no official question bank at all. The official organization doesn't provide any question bank. They only release a small number of sample questions. Moreover, the questions here, especially the content we'll see in the upcoming question banks here, mainly composed of actual questions from previous years, as well as some predicted and simulated questions for this year. Of course, during the exam, some of these questions might actually appear, and some predictions might be accurate, but it doesn't mean or guarantee that all of them will be. So in terms of the question bank, the PMP question bank is different from other question banks. You see, it's said to be less stable, and that's actually because the questions themselves change frequently. So first of all, the PMP certification mainly focuses on scenario-based questions, placing more emphasis on practical application and hands-on ability. It relies more on understanding, including drawing from practical experience. So when you tackle the upcoming questions, don't just memorize the answers. What's more important is to understand the meaning behind the questions and to apply that knowledge flexibly. Only by doing this can you truly benefit, which will help you in your future exams. Alright, so next, let's take a look at the specific content of the question bank. Okay, let's start by looking at the first question. The first question is about a solution, and this solution is a national level solution. Because the new project manager discovered that the proposal requires compliance with multiple organizations and policies. The manager understands that we are already compliant in several areas. However, certain specific regulatory requirements for this project have not been fully met. They are not completely in place. So what about senior management? They suggest that the project manager ignore these compliance issues. Why? Because when the project reaches that stage, we will be ready and can continue developing our proposal. Now, in this scenario, what should our project manager do? In fact, we often mention that we should judge each question from the perspective of the project manager. So here, first of all, in project management, everyone should pay attention to the fact that when facing uncertain situations or when encountering certain specific requirements related to the project manager's primary task is to clarify and verify these requirements. And then determine how to meet these requirements. So verifying regulatory requirements and establishing a strategy for them is actually one of the main tasks of a project manager. Therefore, here we can eliminate option B. Option B is about recording interactions with senior management in the risk register, which actually doesn't have much significance. The risk register is to record project risks, and it can include risks arising from ignoring compliance. However, there is no need to record interactions. So which option should we choose for this question? We should select option A, verify regulatory requirements and establish a compliance strategy. As for the other options, for example, option C suggests advising senior management to continue doing so, right? That would violate professional ethics, so that's definitely not correct. If you look at option D, it suggests using another proposal to meet regulatory requirements. But this also doesn't meet our requirements, nor does it align with our overall strategy. So for this question, we should choose option A. Overall, especially if you encounter questions on the exam that you haven't seen before, what should you do? Actually, there's no need to panic. If you come across unfamiliar questions, just stick to the most standard approach and the exact right one. You should analyze the question from the perspective of ethical and moral standards. This is the most fundamental approach. If you really can't make a judgment based on your previous studies, and you haven't seen similar questions in the question bank, then just make your choice based on ethics and the law. This is the most basic principle. Of course, what's even better is, first, you need to master the overall concepts, including some basic requirements of project management, the primary responsibilities of a project manager, and so on. These are the fundamental things you need to know. Alright, next let's take a look at the following question. For the next question, in this scenario, the project manager identified a risk related to the deliverables completed by the contractor and added it to the risk register. During the final delivery review meeting, the project manager noticed that the proposed mitigation measures did not produce the expected results. So what should we do in this situation? Actually, this is somewhat similar to the previous question. In the previous question, issues were discovered before taking action, but in this case, when did it happen? It happened at the very end. What was discovered during the final review meeting? It was found that one of the measures did not achieve the expected result. What should we do about this? First of all, here, some of the options may be correct, but they are not necessarily the best choices. First, this is a single choice question, please pay attention to that. In our questions, U1 will tell us whether it's a single choice or multiple choice question. So in this case, it's a single choice question. For single choice questions, not all options are necessarily completely correct or completely incorrect. One feature of the PMP certification is that there may be several options that are all correct. So what do we need to do? We need to pick the best, the optimal answer from among the correct options. This is a basic principle for answering these questions. The underlying principle and requirements. So here, let's first take a look. Option A is to review procurement performance to identify the root cause. Option B is to reassess the probability of the risk occurring and the mitigation strategies. Option C is to submit a change request to implement the risk response plan for this risk. Option D is to audit the procurement process to identify why the mitigation measures did not work effectively. We can take a look at these four options. Actually, they all seem reasonable. Basically, none of these four options are wrong. In fact, these four options are indeed not incorrect, but which one is better? You can think about it. What kind of situation are we in right now? At this point, the risk has already occurred. And since the mitigation measures have not achieved the expected results, what should we do? Right? As project managers, what should we consider? We should consider other risk response strategies. Now that the risk has already materialized, right, we should be thinking about how to deal with this problem. Instead of just documenting it or looking for the cause, right? The most important thing is actually to address the problem. So what should we choose for this question? We should choose option C, which is to submit a change request to implement the risk response plan for this risk, because the risk has already occurred and we need to take action. Carry out mitigation. In order to implement a new or revised response strategy, we should actually submit a change request to ensure that our project team and stakeholders are all aware of this change, and then review and approve this specific issue. Now, as for option A here, actually, this option mainly focuses on procurement performance. As for the root cause, it's actually unwise to only look at procurement performance at this stage. This is not the optimal solution. Option B, on the other hand, says that if the mitigation measures do not achieve the expected results, it means the risk has already occurred, right? So is it meaningful to reassess the probability of this risk occurring at this point? Actually, it's meaningless, right? Option B still wants to assess the probability of occurrence, but that doesn't really make sense anymore. In this situation, what should we focus on? We should focus on the impact brought by the risk and reevaluate and adjust our risk response strategies. This is the issue with option B. As for option D, although the mitigation measures may be related to the contractor's delivery, that doesn't necessarily mean the procurement process is the root cause of the problem. So what should we choose for this question? Option C. For this question, actually, among these options, there are quite a few that are correct, but they're not the optimal answer, just among these four. Actually, if you think about it, in essence, they're all correct, right? All four options are correct, but option C is actually a bit better. This is our second question. From this second question, what can we see? What issue does it reveal? It's about our PMP certification. It's not that rigid. The way of thinking isn't so fixed. And it's not that simple either. It's not just a matter of 1 + 1 = 2. Instead, what is it? It requires you to think. Yes, it requires you to think. All right. Next, let's look at the third question. In the third question, our project manager is assigned to a project where both the schedule and the budget are very tight. The project manager determines that the project lacks the resources needed for completion. What should we do in this situation? All right, so what's the main issue in this question? It's a lack of resources. The main problem here is a shortage of resources. So what should we do when resources are lacking? Let's first look at option A. Option A is about our identifying resource requirements and communicating with stakeholders to seek resources. Option B is to update the risk register, indicating that due to a lack of viable resources, the project may be delayed. As for resources, it's about defining the work structure. Identify resource gaps and reduce project management activities. Option D is to formally submit a scope change request to stakeholders in order to adjust the project scope based on available resources. All right, let's take a look. At first glance, there really doesn't seem to be anything wrong, right? It still looks like $4 and there aren't really any major issues. But what is our purpose here? Right? Our purpose is to solve the problem in order to complete the project. That's the most basic requirement. So among these 4 options, actually none of them are wrong. But which one is more helpful for completing the project? So naturally, what should we actually choose here? We should choose option A, because with option A, we are identifying resource needs and communicating with that type of person to seek resources. Because in our current project, what is the main issue? It's a lack of resources, right? There aren't really any other major problems at the moment. Since you are lacking resources, once we supplement these resources, right, that will actually provide the greatest help to our project. Now, let's compare this with the other options below. Right? For example, with option B, if you just update the risk register, you're only pointing out the lack of resources without any follow-up actions. So it doesn't really help the project much. The same goes for options C and D, right? It's just stating the issue. Define what? Learn about resources, right? Define, identify resource gaps, or reduce project management activities. These actually don't really help move our project forward. So for this question, it's because the lack of resources is already a confirmed issue. But this issue will cause some risks, right? In this situation, what should we do? We need to address the problem first, which means seeking resources as soon as possible. That's our third question. All right, next, let's look at the fourth question. The fourth question is about one of our team members. This team member is having some issues. He feels frustrated. Why? Because his performance is below average, and the number of projects he's completed is less than that of other team members. As a result, the whole team has become negative and is no longer participating. This will reduce our team's collaboration and productivity, right? As project managers, how can we improve the team's performance? All right. First, option A is to meet with the team member and emphasize individual contributions to encourage competition within the team. Option B is to reiterate to the team that everyone is an important part of the team, and that performance is measured at the team level, not the individual level. Option C is to create a visual dashboard that includes both individual and team performance levels, so that team members can see everyone's contributions. Option D is to talk with the team leader to determine ways to keep the team working independently, and independently address the concerns of team members. Right? On the surface, all 4 options still appear to be correct, but what do we have here? This is still a single choice question, and we can only select the best option. So here, our question is, how can we improve the team's performance? It's not just about one person, because first of all, this question describes one person feeling frustrated, right? However, our ultimate goal is to improve the performance of the entire team. So what should we do? So first of all, when it comes to the whole team, which of the 4 options focuses on the entire team? Actually, it's option B. Each of us is a part of the team assembly, and performance is measured at the team level, not at the individual level. In a team environment, encouraging teamwork and team spirit is quite important. As for the project manager, they should ensure that our team members, first of all, understand, and secondly, recognize that each of us is an important part of the team. Team performance is based on the whole, not on individuals. This approach is actually more effective for the entire team. As for the other options, relatively speaking, option A, right? Option A is about meeting with individual team members, emphasizing personal contributions, and encouraging competition. But overall, our goal is for the entire team, not just for one person, not for a single individual, but for the whole team. So for this question, we choose option B. All right, next, let's take a look at question 5. For question 5, first of all, our Agile team has already started a new project. So when should the project manager organize their first team retrospective? A team retrospective is basically a review or summary, relatively speaking. First, option A is after a few weeks have passed. Option B is when the team reaches an important milestone. Option C is when the team completes a major quality release. Option D is when the team is making good progress. The team's work is progressing smoothly. These are our 4 options. So regarding these 4 options, let's look at option A first. In this case, generally speaking, many teams use some kind of iterative approach, especially 2-week iterations. At the end of each iteration, there are usually demos and retrospectives. However, when it comes to team retrospectives, they are not necessarily tied to the iteration, so team members can decide when to hold them. Teams can choose to hold retrospectives at these key moments. That's our point here. This is one of the main points in the Agile Practice Guide is a knowledge point. Here, you should try to remember it, because when it comes up in the exam, it might not use this exact question. First, when the team completes a release or adds some features, it doesn't have to be a huge increment. It can be any release, no matter how small. Second, a few weeks have passed since the last retrospective. Third, when the team encounters problems. This includes situations where the team is not coordinating smoothly to complete work, or especially cases like the one in the previous question 4, that's also acceptable. Additionally, when the team reaches any other milestone. So, to sum up, all of the situations we've just seen can actually serve as a point for the whole team to conduct a retrospective. So actually all the options A, B, C, and D are correct. Actually, all of them are acceptable. But option D has a slight issue. Retrospectives should be held when things aren't going smoothly. When everything is going smoothly, there usually isn't much of a problem. So in that sense, D is a bit questionable. Overall, options A, B, and C are all correct. They all seem right. As for option B, the main issue is that our first retrospective shouldn't be limited to major milestone, as any milestone can be a point for the team to hold a retrospective. Please note, since this is a new project, the first team retrospective can actually be held at any milestone, so B is a bit too absolute in its wording. Now, regarding option C, its requirement is that a retrospective should be held after the release of a significant increment. However, according to our principles and the Agile timeboxing guidelines, a retrospective can be held after any increment is completed, regardless of its size. So the emphasis on significant increments is also problematic. Therefore, the best choice is actually option A, which refers to issues from the past few weeks. After a few weeks have passed, regardless of whether any problems occurred, whether there were any obstacles, or whether any increments were delivered, all of these are important, because if you haven't held a retrospective for several weeks and you don't conduct one promptly, overall, it means that for the whole team, development is actually not very healthy, no matter what problems may have occurred before, right? If several weeks have already passed, you absolutely must conduct a summary and retrospective for the team. You need to lead all team members in summarizing and exchanging ideas about future development. So this is actually very important. As for options B, C, and D, they all have certain issues. Overall, they're not exactly wrong, but each has some minor flaws. So for this question, we should choose. Option A is, without a doubt, a very good choice. So this is our answer. You can actually see this from the content of the PMP certification question bank, right? Overall, the PMP question bank is relatively flexible, not so rigid. Compared to some of the practice questions or multiple choice questions we've discussed before, it's actually more flexible. It places more emphasis on practical application and your own thinking. Here, we mainly explain some of the real questions from previous years, as well as some predicted mock questions for this year. Basically, the coverage is quite comprehensive. Compared to other certifications, the coverage here is at least 50% lower actually. Even saying 50% is an understatement. For some other certifications, it's not a problem for the question banks to cover 89% or even 90% of the questions, because their question banks overall don't change much. That is, the frequency of changes is relatively low, and each time there is a change, not much is altered. However, for our PMP certification, comparatively speaking, if we can achieve a coverage rate of 40% to 50%, that's already quite good actually. It's very good. For the rest, everyone really needs to focus on the questions we've already encountered. What should you do? Reflect on them, and remember the ways of thinking about these questions in your own mind. In your own mind, try to draw inferences from one instance to another, integrate all this knowledge thoroughly, and also combine it with some real-life experience from social practice to make judgments. This is our question bank. If you need a complete question bank, you can leave a comment below and get the most stable question bank at the best price. That's all for today. Goodbye, everyone.